And if you saw the previous video, welcome back. The creation story comes to us at the very beginning of our Bible to tell us about the origins of the universe, the earth that we live on, and all of creation upon the earth. It doesn't make us ask some important questions. Are there lessons to be learned here? Are there symbols and patterns within the story that tell us something else? Or is it simply there to recount events in our history? For hundreds of years, this story has been the battleground where Bible nerds and science nerds have argued about their perspective. Now, at different times in my life, I have been called a math nerd, a Bible nerd, and probably a few other types as well. And I have participated in a number of fights between nerds I have observed more than I care to count. So I know how these fights and debates look like from the outside, and I understand the kind of emotional investment that these people put into their specific fields of interest and study. But I want to say something. I don't think that the conversation around the Bible's creation story needs fewer nerds. If anything, I think it needs more. Now, let me explain where I'm coming from when I say that. Looking at this story, if we ask literature nerds, and especially literature nerds who have a connection to ancient literature, they will tell us that there is something deeper happening here, that they will look at the passage and they will see numerical patterns and symbols, and they point to different pieces of wisdom. And as storytellers, these literature nerds will tell us that this story is as much an introduction of a character named God as it is a story about anything. The God that we meet in this story speaks with authority. This God creates with intention and has an eye for detail. Nothing that happens in this story is accidental. Now, if we talk to our friends who are history nerds, and I use the word nerds endearingly, the history nerds will tell us that this isn't the only creation story, and it isn't even the first one written from a religious or spiritual perspective. Babylonian and Mesopotamian religious groups have creation stories that predate the biblical story. In fact, the one that we find in the Bible has similarities to the previous stories. But they are not scientific similarities, so we can leave the science nerds out of that comparative conversation. And they are not actually religious similarities, so we can leave the Bible nerds out of that conversation too. They are, in fact, poetic similarities. So maybe we need to bring the literature nerds back into it. The similarities are there not as evidence that details were copied. They are there to highlight the differences between the characters in the story. The other gods create earth and humanity almost by accident. Humans are created as an afterthought by gods that are too busy doing other things to pay much attention to people at all. In contrast, the God that we meet in the biblical creation story sets out to create the world, sets out to create humanity, and has humanity at the pinnacle of that creation. A very intentional part of the process. Now, if we involve some philosophy nerds, they will tell us that perhaps the struggles of the early Hebrews who recorded and presented this creation story line up pretty closely with the struggles of the Judeo-Christian religious community today. The stories of the other religious groups at that time told about how the world was created in chaotic fashion by uncaring and unfeeling forces that were largely unsympathetic to the needs of the human beings who were in fact created. Now, the dominant narrative has changed. The dominant narrative is now a scientific one and not a religious or historical one, and yet the sentiment is the same. The dominant narrative now is that this earth came to being as the result of uncaring and unfeeling forces that are not sympathetic to our concerns, and we in the religious community beg to differ. We believe in a God who sees the creation as beautiful, a God who wants us as humanity to tend and care for the creation, and a God who has placed on all of us humans, us as well as the people around us, the divine mark of creation. And so, in order for us to be in harmony with that creating God, we have to work to be at harmony with creation and the other people around us. Thanks for tuning in.